The 17th signal went out the same way the first 16 had. Senna watched the transmission bar fill, watched it complete, watched the confirmation blink twice on her screen. Somewhere out in the relay network, a machine had received a cry for help and passed it along without caring what it meant. 9 days, 17 signals. The Drac had been eating Sari's 7 alive for 9 days, and the galaxy had sent back silence. She leaned back in her chair and pressed 2 fingers to the side of her neck, the way her mother had taught her when she was young, feeling her own pulse, counting it. A Vori habit for stress. The pulse was fast. Through the narrow viewport above her console, she could see the eastern sky glowing orange. Not sunrise. Sunrise on Sari's 7 was pale green and quiet. That orange was 2 Vori escort ships burning in low orbit. They had been burning for 6 hours. Nobody had gone up to help them because there was nothing left to send. Admiral Bryn stood behind her. She could feel him there without turning. He had been standing in the same spot for 20 minutes, reading the same dead screens, saying nothing. He was a tall man, Bryn, gray at the temples and scarred across one jaw from a border conflict 40 years ago. He did not panic. He had simply run out of options and was waiting to see if the universe would offer him a new one. The console chimed. Senna sat forward. A response. An actual response, not an automated acknowledgement but a live reply with a vessel's signature attached. She read the ID code, then she read it again. UES Ridgeline, human vessel, small transport class. Current position, 4 hours out from Sari's 7 orbit. She scrolled down for the manifest. Crew complement, cargo, reinforcement numbers. 8. She counted them individually because she was certain she was misreading. 8 names. 8 soldiers. The manifest listed them by name, rank, and specialization. She read all 8 names. Then she looked at the orange glow through the viewport, at the burning ships, at the sensor board showing 400,000 Drac units massed in the eastern farmlands, and she read the number 8 one more time. Bryn had moved. He was reading over her shoulder. She heard him exhale once through his nose. Then he walked out of the room. The door sealed behind him. He did not say anything because there was nothing to say. Senna stayed at the console. A junior officer appeared at her side and told her she had been assigned as liaison to the incoming human unit. He handed her a datapad with their arrival time and docking bay assignment. She took it. She did not look up from the manifest. 8 humans. From a world the galaxy called a death world, a place so hostile that most species used it as a benchmark for survival conditions. A world where the air itself could kill if you were not adapted to it, where the seasons tried to kill you, where the ground tried to kill you, where even the water in certain regions would dissolve tissue on contact. Humans had been born on that world and had somehow decided to stay. And the galaxy had sent 8 of them. She closed the manifest. She had 4 hours. The landing bay smelled of burnt fuel and clay dust. A small group of Vori soldiers had gathered at the edge of the bay. Nobody had told them to come. Word had spread about the human response and they had come to look. Some were talking quietly. A few were not hiding that they were laughing. The UES Ridgeline docked with a low mechanical thud. The ramp lowered. 8 humans walked out. They did not march. No formation, no ceremony. They moved like people who had been sitting in a transport for a long time and needed to stretch their legs. Their gear was worn and personal, scratched plates, straps tied in individual ways. They had the look of people who had made their equipment their own over many years. Lieutenant Dara West came first. Compact, not tall, with dark eyes that moved fast. The moment she stepped off the ramp, those eyes swept the landing bay in one smooth pass. Ceiling, walls, exits, the watching Vori soldiers, Senna, and settled on Senna because she was the only one who had walked forward. Behind her, Sergeant Owen Hale squinted at the overhead lighting strips, studying them. Private Nia Cole crouched the moment she stepped off the ramp and pressed her palm flat against the floor, eyes unfocused, feeling something. West introduced herself with a short nod. No speech. She asked one question before Senna could begin her prepared welcome. What is the soil composition in the eastern farmlands? Senna did not know the exact answer. She said she could find out. West said that was fine. She would check herself. Senna looked at her datapad. Her prepared words felt like a different language now. She put it away. She said, "Follow me." West was already looking at the wall map of Sari 7. Nia was still crouched, still thinking about what the floor had told her. Owen was eating something from a small pouch, looking at the orange glow through the bay's upper viewport. None of them asked how bad the situation was. They had already decided it did not matter. Senna turned toward the corridor, and 8 humans followed her into a fight they had crossed 4 hours of open space to find. Captain Rel spread the tactical map across the operations table and did not offer anyone a seat. He had the manner of a soldier who believed that standing kept people honest. The map showed Sari 7 from above. The eastern third of the colony was shaded red, lost ground, 9 days of it carved out by the Drac in waves so consistent they could have been timed with a mechanical clock. Rel explained the pattern without emotion. Wave interval, 50 to 55 minutes, each wave larger than the previous. Current Drac presence in the eastern farmlands, estimated 400,000 units. The Vari were holding the central settlement with 3 defensive walls, and a force that had started at 12,000 and was now closer to 8. He finished. He looked at the 8 humans standing around his table. West had been writing in a small worn notepad the entire time. She asked her first question without looking up. What is the drainage pattern in the eastern farmlands? Rel said that was not a tactical concern. West wrote something down and asked her next question. Wind direction at night, predominant bearing. Rel answered. She wrote that down too. She asked whether the Drac responded faster to sound or to ground vibration. Rel said they used both. She asked if anyone had timed the gap between the last pulse of the relay towers and the beginning of each wave. Rel said no, nobody had measured that specifically. She asked if she could review all 9 days of sensor data. He said yes, because he had nothing better to offer. Senna watched Rel during this. She had served under him for 2 years. She had never seen him look uncertain. He did not look uncertain now exactly, but something in his face had changed. He was answering questions he had not thought to ask himself, and he did not like how that felt. After the briefing, Owen asked if the squad could walk the outer perimeter before dawn. Rel said that was inadvisable. Owen thanked him and asked again. Rel looked at West. West said nothing. Rel said fine. Senna went with Owen because she told herself it was her job as liaison. It was not entirely a lie. The perimeter at night was cold and quiet in a way that felt wrong for a planet under siege. The Drac did not attack at night. Nobody knew why and nobody had investigated it because they were too busy surviving the daytime. Owen walked slowly along the outer wall. He was not carrying a weapon. He crouched every so often and touched the ground with his fingers. At one section of the northern wall, he stopped and crouched for a long time, pressing both palms flat against the clay. Senna asked what he was doing. He said he was letting the place talk. She asked what it was saying. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said the Drac hit lowest ground first because they use vibration for communication and signal travels better through dense compacted soil. The drainage depression 200 meters to the east created a channel of dense clay that ran directly toward the wall's weakest section. That was where the next wave would concentrate. Senna pulled the sensor maps from her memory and checked his reasoning against 9 days of attack data. He was right. Her own analysts had missed it. Owen stood up, brushed the clay from his hands, and kept walking. He did not point out that he had just outread a 9-day analysis in 10 minutes. He simply moved on to the next section of wall as if it were an obvious thing that needed doing. The next morning, Nia showed Senna a hand-drawn chart in the operations room. It was a map of every Drac wave for 9 days, plotted against time and against the sensor readings from the black relay towers the swarm used for coordination. The towers pulsed violet light in a sequence before each wave. Nia had mapped the pulse sequence and the wave intervals separately and then overlaid them. The gap was not 50 to 55 minutes. It was 47 minutes, consistent across all 9 days. The gap corresponded exactly to the time required for the relay towers to complete their reset cycle after a wave. The Drac could not attack again until the towers told them to. The towers were the clock. Senna stared at the chart. She asked, "Why did our people not see this?" Nia said, "They were counting waves. I counted the silence between them." The alarm went off before Senna could respond. A Drac scout unit had broken through a crack in the northern corridor wall. Vori soldiers in the corridor pulled back immediately, shouting. The crack had been forming for 2 days. Everyone knew it was there. Nobody had sealed it because the sealing materials were being rationed. The 8 humans did not pull back. Wes said 4 words in a low voice and the squad moved. They pulled storage crates from a side room, stacked them in a pattern that was not random, and sealed the breach in 2 minutes and 50 seconds. The Drac scouts that made it through were contained and driven back. No Vori casualties. Senna stood at the corridor entrance and watched. She counted the time because she needed to do something with her hands. Rel was beside her. He watched the humans reset their positions, check each other without being told to, redistribute their materials with no wasted motion. He said nothing for a long time. Then he said, "They move like people who have done this before." Senna said, "I think they have." Rel did not respond, but he did not look dismissive anymore. He looked like a man who was updating a calculation he had thought was already finished. Senna found Nia in a side corridor during the midday lull, sitting cross-legged on the floor with her back against the wall and her eyes closed. Not sleeping, just still. The kind of stillness that was deliberate, practiced, like a skill someone had learned because their body needed it to function. Senna sat across from her. She did not say anything for a moment. Then she asked the question she had been carrying since the landing bay. "Why did only 8 of you come?" Nia opened her eyes. She thought about the question for a moment in a way that suggested she was deciding how much was useful to explain, not deciding whether to answer. She said, "We were not chosen by rank or by combat record. We were chosen by origin, by where on Earth we grew up." She pointed at Owen, who was visible through the open corridor door, sitting against the far wall doing something careful with a piece of equipment. "He grew up in an inland mountain region," she said. "High altitude. The air pressure there is low enough that most species would begin to lose function in 2 or 3 hours. He has lived in it his whole life. His heart and his lungs adapted over decades. He can operate in thin and failing atmospheres where other soldiers would be useless." She pointed at west, somewhere further in the bunker. She grew up in a desert, daily temperature range of 50 degrees. In a single day you could have killing cold before sunrise and killing heat by midday. Every plant in that region is either edible or lethal, and there is almost nothing in between. She learned to read environments the way other people learn to read faces. She can walk into a place she has never seen and tell you in 10 minutes what it is likely to do to you. Senna asked, "And you?" Nia said, "I grew up in a coastal city that floods twice a year. Saltwater and chemical runoff, both. The buildings I grew up in were always failing at the base because the water worked at them constantly. I learned structural weakness before I learned arithmetic. I learned what failing ground looks like, what soil that has been compromised from below looks like. I can read a surface and tell you what is wrong underneath it." Senna was quiet, then she asked, "Does Earth hurt you?" Nia considered the question with the same care she gave everything. She said, "Yes, always has. That is not separate from what we are. That is what we are." She explained it slowly. Earth was not a gentle place. It never had been. Every region had its own particular way of making survival difficult, and the species that lived there had to adapt or be removed. Humans had not been removed. Over thousands of years, they had spread into every region on the planet, every climate, every elevation, every level of atmospheric hostility. Not because any of those places were comfortable, but because humans had discovered that discomfort, studied long enough, became information. Senna said, "We thought you were sent as a symbol, a gesture to show someone had answered." Nia nodded. She said, "We knew that was how it would look." Senna asked, "Does that bother you?" Nia thought about it. She said, "We came anyway. The reason someone sends you matters less than the reason you go." Senna looked at her for a long time. Then she asked something she had not planned to ask. She said, "On Earth, when something is very difficult and you cannot stop it and you cannot fix it, what do you do?" Nia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "We make it smaller. We break it into the piece we can do right now. We do that piece. Then we find the next piece." Senna thought about the sensor board with its 400,000 red markers, and the 3 defensive walls holding, and the burned ships in orbit, and the 17 signals nobody had answered. She said, "That sounds very hard." Nia said, "It is. We do it anyway." She picked up her ration pack and offered half to Senna. Senna took it because it seemed like the right thing to do. They sat together for a while without talking. Later, when Nia had gone back to the operations room, Senna opened her personal file on her console and typed one line. She wrote they were not sent as reinforcements. They were sent as the right tool. She did not file it. She saved it and went back to her station, and somewhere in the eastern farmlands the Drac were massing for the next wave, and the 47-minute clock was still running. But for the first time in 9 days, Senna did not feel like the clock was the only thing in the room. West presented the plan to Rel at 2100 hours, and he did not like any of it. She stood at the operations table with Nia's chart between them and explained in short, clean sentences. During the 47-minute window, the squad would move from the perimeter into Drac-held territory, locate the 4 relay towers in the eastern farmland sector, destroy them, and return before the next wave cycle began. No Vori support. No backup units. 8 people. Rel said, "The towers are 2 kilometers into Drac territory." West said, "Yes." He said, "If you miss the window, you will be inside the perimeter when 400,000 Drac units surge." She said, "Yes." He said, "I should send soldiers with you." She said, "With respect, no. More people moving through clay soil at night makes more sound and more vibration. The Drac sense through the ground. Every extra body is a risk that does not carry equivalent benefit." Rel looked at Senna as if Senna could explain this. Senna had no explanation. She had watched these people for 3 days and she had stopped trying to explain them. Rel said, "If this fails, the colony loses its only effective tactical unit." West said she understood. She asked if he had a better option. He did not. They moved out at 2:30. Senna watched them go from the perimeter camera feed in the operations room. 8 small shapes slipping into the dark farmland with no lights and no sound. The eastern farmlands looked wrong on camera at night. The Drac held the ground, but they did not move much between waves. They sat in their configurations and pulsed low vibration through the soil in patterns that the Vori analysts had never decoded. The relay towers stood at intervals across the farmland, each one a black spire about 4 meters tall with a violet light at its tip that pulsed in slow rhythm, like breathing. At the 12-minute mark, the squad was past the first defensive collapse line. No contact. At the 20-minute mark, Nia stopped. On the camera feed, it was a tiny thing, barely visible. She crouched. She held very still. Then she moved 2 meters to the left and the squad rooted around something in the ground that the camera could not resolve. Senna zoomed in. The soil in the original path was slightly darker than the surrounding clay, a compression difference, something buried, a Drax sensor node, she realized, the kind that transmitted ground pressure data back to the swarm's coordination network. If anyone had stepped on it, the towers would have pulsed early. Nia had seen it by the color of the dirt. The first tower went down at the 26-minute mark. The squad used shaped charges they had brought from the ship, small enough to fit in a jacket pocket, placed at the base where the tower connected to its underground root system. Each tower fell sideways into the clay without a loud sound. The violet light blinked out. Second tower at 31 minutes. Third at 34. The Drac units in the surrounding area stirred but did not coordinate. Without the towers pulsing their reset signal, there was no wave command. Fourth tower at 37 minutes. West's voice came over the comm link to the operations room, flat and calm. She said, 4 down, returning. At 46 minutes, the squad crossed back inside the perimeter, 1 minute before the wave window closed. The wave came at 47 minutes exactly. Senna watched it on the sensor board. The red mass moved from the eastern farmland toward the colony in the same direction it always did, but it hit the wrong sectors. It split in 3 places. Units doubled back on each other. The coordination that had made every previous wave feel like a single organism was gone. This was a crowd, not a machine. The Vori defensive lines held, more easily than they had in 9 days. Rel stood at the operations table and watched the sensor board for a long time after the wave broke apart. He said, one operation changed the shape of this entire siege. Senna said yes. He said they did not do that with firepower. She said, no. They did it with 47 minutes of information they collected while we were running from each wave, and one person who learned to read soil by watching water destroy buildings when she was a child. Rel was quiet. Then he said something she did not expect from him. He said, I want to learn how they think. Senna said, I am not sure you can learn it. I think Earth teaches it over a lifetime. He said, then explain what you have learned so far. She sat down. She started talking. Outside the operations window, the Drac were regrouping in a farmland that no longer knew what to tell them. And for the first time in the siege, the Vori were the ones with more time than the enemy. The Drac adapted on day 11. Without the relay towers, they switched to biological signaling. A low chemical pulse passed between units through physical proximity, slower than the towers but functional. The waves became irregular in timing but larger in mass, as if the swarm was compensating for lost precision with raw weight. The eastern wall took the worst of it, and 2 sections had to be reinforced overnight, using materials Rel had released from ration storage, because West had asked for them, and he had stopped pretending to evaluate her requests before approving them. The second operation into Drac territory on day 11 was a shorter run, targeting a chemical dispersal point the swarm was using to spread its biological signal across a wider area. Smaller target, closer to the perimeter, lower risk on paper, but the Drac had moved soldier-cast units into the sector since the tower operation. Faster, armored, reactive in a way the standard swarm units were not. Tomas was on the left flank when the soldier-cast unit came from a collapsed drainage channel that nobody had marked on the maps. It moved fast, lateral, and the spine lash it released was a reflex, not an aimed attack. It caught Tomas across the left ribs and knocked him sideways into the clay. The squad extracted him in under 90 seconds. The operation completed. They were back inside the perimeter before the chemical dispersal point finished burning. But Tomas was bleeding internally, and breathing in a way that meant something was wrong with the pressure in his chest. The Vori medics came quickly. They slowed when they got close. One of them asked West about his blood compatibility with a Vori coagulant compound. Another reached for a scanner and stopped, realizing the calibration on their medical equipment was set for Vori physiology and would give them wrong readings on a human. Wes thanked them and moved them aside. She and Owen worked on the floor of the corridor with Nia holding a light overhead. They had a small medical kit from the ship, not large but sufficient, built for exactly this kind of problem because humans on Earth had a long history of being injured in places far from anyone qualified to help. West made 2 incisions, placed a drainage device no larger than a finger, and sealed Tomas's chest in 22 minutes. Senna stood at the corridor entrance. Nobody had asked her to leave, so she stayed, watching, not helping because there was nothing useful she could do. When it was finished, Tomas was stable. He would not fight for several days, but he was breathing normally. West cleaned her hands with a cloth from her kit. Then she stood and walked back toward the operations room. Senna followed her. She had to say something. She asked what came out, which was the question she had been carrying longer than any other. She asked, "Are you not afraid?" Wes stopped walking. She turned and looked at Senna directly. She said, "I am afraid every hour. I was afraid growing up. Earth does not make people fearless. It makes people functional." She walked on. Senna stood in the corridor for a moment and thought about the difference between those 2 things. Fearless meant the fear was not there. Functional meant you carried it and moved anyway. One was a gift. The other was a choice made repeatedly under pressure, probably thousands of times before anyone ever noticed you doing it. That evening Senna brought food to Nia from the Vori mess hall. A gray grain paste that most Vori found comforting, that smelled strongly of fermented minerals and warm clay. She was not sure why she brought it. It felt like the right direction to walk. Nia took the bowl and smelled it without any visible reaction. She ate a spoonful. She chewed. She said, "This is almost exactly like a fermented fish paste from the market near where I grew up. The smell is almost identical." Senna looked at her. Nia said, "I grew up 3 blocks from a fish processing dock. This is gentle by comparison." They sat together in the corridor and ate. Senna described Saris 7 in the dry season when the farmlands turned gold and the sky at dawn was pale green. She said the planet was quiet in a way that was difficult to describe after so long in the bunker. Nia listened. Then she said, "That sounds like a place worth a lot of trouble to keep." Senna said, "Yes, it is." From down the corridor came Tomas's voice, low and dry, asking Nia why she had not brought him anything. She called back that he had been stabbed and did not deserve a reward for it. He said that was not how rewards worked. She said she would think about it. He made a sound that was not quite a laugh but was close. Senna realized she was smiling. She was not sure when that had started. On day 14 the sky above Saris 7 changed. Senna was at her console when the orbital sensors updated. 3 Galactic Council warships had dropped out of transit above the planet, followed by a Vori battle group that had been rerouted from the border sectors. The combined fleet outnumbered the Drac blockade by a significant margin. The battle above took 4 hours, and when it ended the Drac orbital presence was gone. Ground forces arrived by midday. Fresh Vori units, well supplied, coordinated with the Council strike teams from above. The Drac swarm in the eastern farmlands, already disorganized from 2 weeks of having its coordination systematically dismantled, broke under the combined ground assault and did not reform. By evening, Saris 7 was saved. The official reports credited the Council intervention. The timing of the fleet's arrival, the scale of the battle group, the diplomatic effort required to get the vote approved, those were the narrative. The 14 days before the fleet came were a supporting detail. The 8 humans from a transport called UES Ridgeline were listed in a footnote under Allied units present. Senna read the report and filed it without comment. The next morning the squad gathered in the landing bay with their gear. Tomas was on a stretcher carried by Owen and another squad member, complaining about the angle at which they were holding it. Owen told him to hold still, or he would adjust the angle significantly. Tomas held still. Rel was at the edge of the bay when West walked past. He stopped her. He did not offer a formal commendation. He did not salute. Rel was not the kind of soldier who performed gratitude for an audience. He waited until the nearest Vori soldiers were far enough away that the conversation was private. He said, "I was wrong about what you were." West looked at him for a moment. She said, "Most people are." She kept walking. Rel watched her go and then turned back to the bay with the expression of a man who was revising something large and fundamental in his understanding of the galaxy. Senna fell into step beside Nia near the ramp. She had not prepared anything to say. She had tried twice the night before, and the words had come out formal and empty, so she had stopped. Now she walked beside Nia and said nothing, and Nia seemed to understand that silence and did not fill it with noise. At the base of the ramp, Nia stopped. She reached into her jacket pocket and took out a small flat stone. It was smooth, salt-stained, darkened in the way that stone gets when water has been working at it for a very long time. The edges were worn completely round. It was the kind of object that had been handled thousands of times, carried everywhere, kept close. She put it in Senna's hand. She said, "Earth is always with us. Now a little of it stays here." She did not wait for a response. She went up the ramp and the ship took her with it. Tomas, horizontal on his stretcher, raised one hand towards Senna as Owen carried him past. She raised hers back. He was already looking away by the time the ramp sealed. The UES ridgeline lifted without ceremony. No formal departure signal, no acknowledgement from the bay control system. It simply rose, cleared the bay roof, and was gone into a sky that was pale green at the edges where the sun was lowering. Senna stood in the empty bay for a moment. Then she went back to her console. She wrote the official personal log entry first. Factual, structured, correct. She noted the arrival of Allied human reinforcements, summarized their operational contributions, confirmed their departure following mission completion. Professional language for a professional record. Then she opened a second file. She had no particular plan for it. She just started writing. She wrote about Owen pressing his hands into cold clay in the dark and reading a planet's drainage pattern like a language. She wrote about Nia finding a buried sensor node by the color of the soil, something she had learned by watching saltwater undermine the buildings of her childhood city. She wrote about West asking questions in a briefing room that made a scarred veteran commander realize he had been looking at the same problem for 9 days without seeing it. She wrote about 8 people who arrived in a place that had called for an army, said nothing about the gap between what was asked for and what had come, and simply got to work. She titled the document, "What 8 People from a Death World Taught Me About Survival." She looked at the file for a while. Then she moved it from the report directory into her personal archive, under a folder she used for things she was not ready to share. She did not file it. Some truths were not for councils. Outside, the sky over Saris 7 was finally, for the first time in 14 days, simply the sky. Pale green at the horizon, quiet in the way it was supposed to be. She turned the console screen off and let herself look at it.